Now in this book, Race and the Writing of History, Riddling the Sphinx, and you can Google this book for yourself and you can read it for yourself. And it says that Nubia, Kush, Ethiopia, according to Hoskins, 1835, Travels in Ethiopia, was the land whence the art and learning of Egypt and ultimately Greece and Rome derived their origin. In this remarkable country we behold the earliest efforts of human science and ingenuity. You dig? So you see, the Greeks and the Romans learned everything from the ancient Egyptians. So you see, the culture is straight African. Then you're gonna come and tell me the Greeks and the Romans brought any knowledge to Africa. Again, it says, the cradle of African civilization by the way of Ethiopia was Central Africa. Ethiopia was Central Africa. Relying on classical authors, Hansberry began in his lectures to outline the antiquity of the classical world intimacy with Ethiopia. His basic argument was that there was clearly contact and interaction between Ethiopians and the people of the Eastern Mediterranean basin hundreds of years prior to the first notations and the earliest use of the term Ethiopian by Homer in the 9th century BC. Clearly an important part of the populations of Arabia, Mesopotamia, Persia and India were of Ethiopian descent. This conclusion was further substantiated by Herodotus' comments concerning the Eastern Ethiopians. So you see, there was a clear contact and interaction between Ethiopians and the people of Eastern Mediterranean. Again, we go back to this book, Race and the Writing of History, Riddling the Sphinx, and it says, in the beginnings of European literature, few names are better known and older than that of Ethiopia. Before the geographical and historical terms of Babylon and Assyria, or for the matter of terms Greece and Rome themselves, Ethiopia was already an old and familiar expression. The very oldest literature communities of Europe were evidently Ethiopia conscious, so they knew about Africans. Again, we read further. Ethiopia and its derivatives were among the oldest living terms known to the geographical historical literature of Europe. So you see, they knew Africans all along, because Africans have always been in those places. And we read further. It was clear that the influence of Ethiopian culture on Egyptian tradition could not be overlooked or ignored. And it couldn't, because that's where it originates from. Central Africa. From the south going up to the north. Yeah, now here you read the Greek descriptions of Negroes. And you read, the Negro appears frequently in Greek literature. The classical Greeks most commonly describe Negroes as Ethiopians, or this signs. But you see, all black people back then were called Ethiopians. And you read further, in Diodorus blah blah blah, this sign for example is associated with black skin, woolly hair and a flat nose. And again, we read further down. In Herodotus, this sign is associated with woolly hair. Herodotus even differences between the woolly haired and the straight haired Ethiopians in relation to each other from west to east, which we today know as the result of Arabic Semitic admixture. You dig? So all those people back then were all of them black Ethiopians. They were black people who came from Africa and migrated to Mesopotamia, Arabia, all those places. You dig? And again we read, Aristotle contrasts the straight hair of the Scythians and the Etruscans with the woolly hair of the Ethiopians and people who live in hot regions. So you see, the Etruscans were black people with woolly hair. Then you're gonna come and tell me the Etruscans were Indo-Aryans or Indo-Europeans. You read right here, he says that the Etruscans had woolly hair of the Ethiopians and people who lived in hot regions. Then you're gonna come and tell me that there were never Africans in Greece and Rome and Crete. Yeah, and let's go to this. Wikipedia, as you see yourself, Arthur Evans, as you read, he was the first British archaeologist to examine the Palace of Knossos, Greece and Minoan civilization with Heinrich Schliemann. You read for yourself right here. Remember his name, Arthur Evans and Heinrich Schliemann. Yeah, and here, back to this book, Race and the Writing of History, Riddling the Sphinx, and you can Google this book for yourself and read it on Google for yourself. And it says, here lay Egyptian African roots exposed, and those roots indicated that Minoan culture knew the Ethiopian type from the beginning of the Minoan age, because they were there first, and it's them who created those civilizations. That's why they were known from the beginning of the Minoan age. And again, it says, the archaeology of Minoan ruins revealed the most important evidence of Aegean and African contacts and the possibilities of Central African origins on some of the contact. The goods of the tombs themselves allow Evans, the British archaeologist I just showed you before, to speculate on the classical testimony of overland routes into African interiors. Evans found a lot of evidence of an African contact in those areas. Let's move on. And again, you read further. This is primarily seen in the archaeological discoveries of scholars such as Hendrik Schliemann and Arthur Evans, as like I showed you before. These discoveries prove the more Asian and direct Ethiopian contact with early Asian civilizations than had ever been speculated previously. Crete became a prime example of this thesis, providing proofs that will make it the basis for contending that Ethiopians had asserted a profound influence on the material and literary aspects of Greek civilization. You dig? Like I told you in part 3, Greek under Kemite influence. So I told you that Greeks or Romans never brought any knowledge to Africa. We had it all before any Roman or Greek ever existed. Ye did. Let's move on. Again it says, the other was relatively late statement that Ethiopians sent great forces abroad into other countries where they succeeded in bringing many parts of the world under their dominion. Long before the Trojan Wars is weighed and reinforced by Herodotus' writing on the Cautions, and both are supported by Minoan findings of an early Ethiopian presence that precedes them. So you see the Ethiopians, black Africans, that's what they called all Africans back then, Ethiopians. So you see Ethiopians have always been in Greece, Rome, Crete, always been there. Like I showed you in part 3, I showed you all the pictures. Now I'm showing you the books that Africans have always been in Crete, Rome, Greece. Yeah, let's move on. Again it says, the notice tied to the archaeological discoveries show a long history of Minoan contact with the black and African cultures from the very beginning of early Minoan civilizations. You dig? As Evans noted, the Behat tombs of the Egypt bear a striking resemblance to the type of the very ancient tombs that had a wide distribution throughout Africa. Evans believed that these architectural structures might have been introduced into the Asian areas by immigrations from Africa, which led him to attribute the foundation of early Minoan culture to an actual settlement of colonists from North Africa into Crete. And this is Arthur Evans, the first archaeologist to examine Minoan civilization, with Hendrik Schliemann, as you read up there for yourself. These two men are the ones who are saying this. This is what they saw when they first came to Crete. Minoan civilization. They saw Egyptian stuff, they saw African stuff, and they saw that Africans came to Minoan Crete first and created those civilizations. Come and prove me wrong. And again, we read again. The fact that the same discoveries which have confirmed the traditional connection between the early civilizations of Europe and ancient Crete have also revealed a certain evidence which seems to connect Ethiopia and Black Africa with ancient Crete. And again, here's more evidence that the Africans were the first in Crete. Africans created Minoan civilization. The culture, Minoan culture, is African. This is Arthur Evans confirming this. Come and prove me wrong. Africans were the foundation of Greek civilization, Minoan civilization. Yeah, let's read again. He goes on to assert that it was the aid of the Ethiopians that the Cretan culture was first carried to the coast of Europe and then inland. This view was confirmed by the Evan excavations at Payton in 1894 and supported by the subsequent works of McIver and Seligman. Here, archaeological finds such as Chemist papyrus, which can only be found in Egypt, the stele of Morenus, the Ethiopian pottery found in Egypt, forged shed considerable light on the activity between Egypt and Ethiopia and the extension of relations with Crete. At the height of the 17th and 18th dynasty, the Ethiopian dynasty, the relationship between the royal houses of Ethiopia and Egypt could not be denied. It can be speculated that they extended as far as Troy and Minoan Crete. Ye did. And it says right here, thus the relation existing between Crete, late Minoan, Troy and 18th dynasty Egypt were relationships with more or less Ethiopianized royal house. So you see, Africans were ruling in Troy, Crete and Egypt, of course, and Ethiopia, Kushite empire. You dig? So Africans, all of Europe was an African colony back then. You see, I told you that the ancient Egyptians, Kushites, Nubians, Libyans came to Crete and created high advanced civilization in Crete. Come and prove me wrong. Come and tell me the ancient Egyptians didn't create Minoan civilization.